Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. He's a man, goddamn.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist, presented by Community America Credit Union. That's my buddy AY with the catchy theme song. He's traveling all around the world, representing the United Nations and doing a lot of cool things. So if you ever have any interest, check out AY Young. He's been a past guest on the show. As for today's guest, he's really looking to do some big things, aren't we all? But life-changing and meaningful, impactful entrepreneurship here. Before I get to my guest, just a quick shout out to my friends at Chief of Staff Kansas City. In this day and age of jobs and great resignation, they are an unbelievable resource for potential employees and employers. You can check them out at chiefofstaffkc.com, making connections that matter. Proud to be partnered with Chief of Staff. Again, chiefofstaffkc.com. As for my guest today, we're now more than 2 years, by the time this runs, into the COVID-19 pandemic, and it would nearly be impossible to find someone who hasn't been impacted by its challenges. That's the commonality we all have. Find me someone that was not impacted by the pandemic. Well, whatever your views of this, that, and everything in between are, it changed all of our lives. Of the many that have been highlighted since its onset, discussions about the impact of lockdowns and isolation on mental health has been consistent. We all feel the collateral damage, but the very people who needed protecting the most may have actually suffered the most. Seclusion helped keep vulnerable seniors from the virus, but it also introduced them to its equally destructive companion, loneliness. Our guest today is tech entrepreneur Eliot Arnold, the CEO and co-founder of MoodSpark, a first of its kind mood improving digital companion. He's widely regarded for his novel approaches to complex human problems, and his latest beta delivers by disrupting negative feelings and replacing them with emotional memories. MoodSpark actually improves the mental and biological health of its users. With a vision based on emotion but backed by science, Eliot and his team have harnessed the power of AI to help make loneliness a thing of the past. What I really love about this is that we all can relate, right? We all have parents, grandparents, loved ones, friends, whoever it might be, that dealt with the isolation at different levels. And I'm really excited right now to bring in two Rounding the Bases, Eliot, to be able to talk more about this. How are you, sir?
Joel, I'm well. Thanks for the intro. That was formidable. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm always fascinated by the serial entrepreneurs because, you're big thinkers, you're creative thinkers. It's not just, hey, I did it. It's what's next, which is for the most part, I think, a healthy thing. Maybe at times it can be a burden, but I think that's the way you guys, gals, the way that you're wired. But I also have to think that every now and then you stumble into something along the way that becomes more meaningful, right? I mean, you believe in everything you're doing. You're looking for solutions. You love that, that fight, that creativity. But when it becomes personal, when it becomes something that you've gone through, it has to be at a different level in terms of that why and purpose. I'm guessing that's the case here.
Absolutely. As an entrepreneur, I always look for big problems to solve, the multi-billion or trillion-dollar problems to solve. And that problem hit me smack in the face in caring for my father, who suffered from extreme anxiety, loneliness, depression, and as a result, several cognitive issues. And in caring for him, it exposed this massive problem in our inefficiencies in treating this population and how we care for the population. So it's not only an important thing for us to consider as a society, as an American society, because by and large, American society is forward-looking and we value youth, and we haven't put as much value on our aging population, which is the largest growing segment of the United States population. So it's soon going to become personal for everybody how we care for the physical and emotional well-being of our senior citizens.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point because, and rightfully so, we have become so focused on the younger generation. And I say rightfully so because they have grown up in a world that none of us, my age, your age, older, ever could have envisioned, right? We opened up this Pandora's box, translation, cell phones, social media, this immediacy that everything has to happen now. And that's the only way that it happens. And it's really messed up the younger generation. So understandably, that's been so much of our focus. And we have, in a good way, started to remove the stigma of mental health. And
Yeah.
I see my kids talking about it like it's not like it's nothing, but like it's a regular part of their lives. And it's not like, oh, what's wrong with me? Well, there's a lot of that, but it's what's wrong with me and them and them and them and them. Like they're all going through stuff, which is scary as hell to me. But with that said, it's been easy to forget about the older generation. And maybe it always has. I don't know. But this pandemic highlighted that. Then again, maybe it was always there. I don't really know. I mean, how much did the pandemic change from what you can see that population?
Oh, I mean, it accelerated these inherent problems that you just mentioned by a factor of 10, in my opinion. I mean, and you're right, this is a cross-generational issue. A lot more attention is certainly being paid to how we address our youth mental health issues, all of which have been exacerbated by COVID-19. The problem still remains in our senior population, naturally. And we're at this interesting inflection point, largely as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Number one, telehealth adoption has increased 3 times as much, both within the general population as well as the senior population. AI is presenting frontiers in medicine and mental health and broader healthcare that are really unlocking a ton of value in how we use computer systems to support the care continuum within the healthcare industry. And lastly, just the lack of caregivers. I mean, COVID has precipitated, we're out of human caregivers. And so you take those 3 problems and it's presenting this inflection point that demands better human to computer interactions in dealing with physical and emotional well-being.
So you went through it on a personal level. I mean, we all, to some extent, did. When I hear you talk about this, I am grateful that both of my parents are alive and have had each other. And there were, countless days, months, weeks, months where they didn't go anywhere because they couldn't. And so I was grateful that they had each other. Same for my in-laws. But, I think about just the loneliness of someone that is aging and not having, a partner, not having someone. And, I saw it certainly with my grandparents and my grandmother, each of my grandmothers after my grandfathers died. And it pulls at you, of course. And now you add in the pandemic. So tell me about the evolution of MoodSpark, at least in your mind. I mean, then we'll talk about where it's at today and we'll talk about what it is and all of that. But when did the light bulb go off for you? Which is a kind of a fun question, I think, to ask a serial entrepreneur, because the light bulb, I believe, is always going off for something, I think. But again, back to what I said initially, this was personal. So when did it click for you?
So when we had this like literally storm of events that required us to move my dad from his home to a skilled nursing facility, and it was Hurricane Irma. My dad wanted to ride out Hurricane Irma by himself, and it was on a direct path towards his home, and we knew that he wouldn't survive that, literally. So a whole series of events transpired where we extracted him out of South Florida. We brought him back to Kansas City. We observed him, and his physical health had just declined. He wasn't very mobile, and he was chronically isolated and chronically lonely living in Florida, and we didn't know about it, and he didn't communicate. It's part of the generation. They don't, everything's great until it's not. And when we finally admitted him into skilled nursing, because he couldn't snap back after several weeks of acute rehab, and when we put him into a skilled nursing assisted living facility, we really wanted to create that sense of home in this new place for him. And it was very hard to do. And the best that the facility had to offer was essentially a shadow box mounted to the outside of his door, which is essentially just a place where you can put a bunch of pictures in order to remind the resident, like, okay, this is their room. But outside of that, there were really no tools to help my father stay connected to what he knew and loved as a person. And I would visit him regularly, and I would show him pictures of our family and his life. And one night, in one of my father's typical depressed states, I showed him a picture of the first sports car he had ever earned as a young professional, and it completely changed his physiology. It was like the medicine he had never taken. He leaned in, he became flush, he was very conversational, his mood radically improved. And as I was observing this, I said, what's going on? What are the psychological factors at play here? And so I began to research this idea of reminiscence therapy, which is a pretty well-known and very, very well-researched domain in cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive stimulation therapy for older adults as well as adolescents. This is being used. This is the idea of reminiscence therapy is being used to treat teen and young adult major depressive disorder. The Menninger Institute has a protocol that they have implemented using reminiscence therapy. And so when I saw this and when I experienced this myself, I had to go deeper, because this was obviously something that was going to benefit my dad ongoing. And we began researching how to do this using technology. We began looking at all of the peer-reviewed research that has been published by the Alzheimer's Association. And we dove in, and we started to conduct our own research on how we could perform this in a digital context. So providing digital reminiscence therapy that was driven by both humans and computers.
So really, I mean, it's amazing to me because this is right up your alley. Like this is your wheelhouse in terms of AI, and then it becomes personal too. So let's talk about that process, and still an ongoing process, of course. But tell me about when that idea starts to come into play, and the traction that you've been able to get.
Yeah, so a good question. I've spent the last 7-8+ years of my career learning about human to computer interfaces and learning about conversational interfaces primarily. So how we can use voice and text to interact with our computers. We developed in my last business that I just sold, we developed a conversational interface for data visualization products. So it could literally enable you to talk to and get answers from your business analytics applications, which serves industry executives very well. So I parlayed that knowledge of conversational interfaces and digital assistants to this line of work, because I felt like if we could develop this idea of a digital companion that senses and responds to mood, that this would be an adjunctive tool both for caregivers to support them in their work, as well as to provide a remote or tele-based care and companion support product for people that are lonely, anxious, depressed, or isolated.
The website, and we'll have it in the show notes as well, is getmoodspark.com. Get, G-E-T, mood, M-O-O-D, spark, S-P-A-R-K, getmoodspark.com. So I encourage everybody to check that one out. What's some of the feedback you've heard?
Well, our research with the Alzheimer's Association that was just published this year was very well received among industry peers. We studied a handful of patients at a facility in Chesterfield, Missouri, with our beachhead customer, Delmar Gardens Enterprises. And that research essentially substantiated our ability to trigger an emotional response based on sparking the emotional memory and then capturing the emotional video. The tool has been very well received as an adjunctive support tool for caregivers. So our primary goal right now in some of the most recent research that we're conducting is to prove our ability to reduce caregiver burden in a clinical setting. So our goal is to use MoodSpark as a way of offloading low-risk interventions from the on-site caregiver to our platform, so that the on-site caregivers, the nurses, the orderlies, the aides that are working in these facilities that are massively overworked, can essentially benefit from this adjunctive tool. So the other interesting thing that the feedback that we've gotten from some of our early customers has been the ability to connect across long distances. So this was kind of we're really focused on the patient and our ability to provide cognitive stimulation therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy components to our patient population, but there's also a benefit to the family. In that they feel relief that they don't have to show up and be there with someone full time. It really provides a relief to them,
and potentially just a lot of good moments for those seniors too, right? I mean, every situation is different, but I think back to my maternal grandmother before she passed away. It's one of my favorite memories. I mean, I remember visiting her in November 2002, and my wife was pregnant with our first, and she could remember details of emigrating to the United States when she was a little girl, but she couldn't remember something from 5 minutes, before, or 2 minutes before. But in one of the sort of strangest twists, she asked how we were doing, and we told her that my wife was pregnant, and she was just the happiest person in the world. And then 2 minutes later, she'd ask us again. So, I mean, the sort of fun part of it was that she actually, we got to watch her 100 times or 50 times get enjoyment out of that. It was a little exhausting, of course, but it was it was a great moment. And so it was kind of our joke is nobody celebrated the news of the birth of our first child more than my grandmother, just because she couldn't remember it. But I sit there and I've thought about that after you and I met, about what it would be like to have some of those memories. In her case, short term was harder, but that stimulus for her, right? That ability to be able to have that impact at any moment of the day.
Yeah, it's a real phenomenon how the brain works. And in Alzheimer's and dementia cases, reliance on the emotional memory, and those are memories that are formed between the ages of 13 and 30 years old. So those are the last memories to go and the most formative memories in terms of our intellect and our wit. So, and the brain is magical in the sense that it taps into the emotional memory as a problem solving and decision making skill. It's the mind's way of distracting and redirecting us away from moments of anxiety or depression when we can hearken back to those emotional memories and draw in those happy moments. That's why we firmly believe that the spirit can be cared for by sparking the emotional memory. I mean, I've seen it work. You've just shown me evidence that it works. It's now it's up to me and it's up to my partners to bottle that, as an entrepreneur and scale it.
Well, I want to talk about where it's going, next steps in just a bit, but first let's go to the baseball themed questions. And this is, to me, it's always a fun question to ask anyone, but when you're dealing with a creator, with a serial entrepreneur, it could be a lot of things, and it might not even be one of the companies or projects that you've worked on. So what is the biggest home run that you've hit professionally in your career, Eliot?
Well, first of all, I love the baseball themed questions, and there are a couple, but I think the biggest home run that I've had so far in my career is my 2019 exit to Click Technologies. So I sold my business. The business started out of pure chaos back in the '08, Great Recession. And, I built this business by myself and then acquired, and then brought in partners to support me along the way. And, we ended up selling it to a Thoma Bravo company, Click Technologies, which is going public this year at 3.5 times revenue plus the acquisition of intellectual property. So it was a big win for us.
That company, by the way, if anybody's interested, the spelling is QLIK, correct?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Just in case, if people start looking, and if they're looking for CL, that's not going to be a QLIK on that one. How about a swing and a miss?
Software's largest competitor.
Okay, there we go. How about a swing and a miss? And what did you learn from it?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. I was a successful intrapreneur before I started my career as an entrepreneur. I built an analytics profit center at the world's largest electronics components distributor. And at the time that I was laid off, the department that I had created over a 5-year period was turning out almost $1.5 million in profit, in net profit, to a very low margin business. So it was a very big deal for that company in terms of its growth strategy. Well, I was loyal, very loyal to that company to a fault, and sort of misassessed the headwinds that the Great Recession would put on such a low margin business. And I missed an opportunity. I had gotten a competing job offer at a top 3 management consulting firm that I was really, really excited. I was so excited to just get the opportunity to go work for them. And I turned it down due to my loyalty to my employer at the time. And then 2 months later, they laid me off. So that was the biggest swing and a miss for me, because in hindsight, I should have taken, the job.
Right.
It would have totally changed the trajectory of my life, of course. But,
right.
Yeah. The lesson I learned there is that, and it kind of relates to the small ball question that you're about ready to ask. But the lesson I learned there is, like, kind of don't put your eggs in one basket.
Mm.
And also sometimes you've got to remove your own bias from decision making in order to make the right decision for your long run trajectory, which you might not even be able to quantify, right?
Right.
So that's kind of how I see that experience.
Yeah, and much easier, much more difficult to do when it's yourself, right? I mean, that
Right.
becomes the challenge. How do you look at it from the outside when you are the one that is on the inside? That's a skill in itself. Okay, how about the small ball? What are the little things? What are those bunts and sacrifices that add up to the big results for you?
So I love the idea of small ball in life and in career, because it translates really well to a book that I'm reading right now called Atomic Habits.
Hmm.
And this book talks about how we fail to meet our goals because we always set the bar too high on goals. And in my personal life, one of the things that I've been doing to play small ball, just personally, is I want to be able to do 1,000 push-ups. Now I know everybody's saying to themselves, "Well, that's impossible. I don't need to do it all at once." And so I'm chunking up this goal in increments of minimum of 10 push-ups every single day. And I've done, since the year started, I've done 10 push-ups, a minimum of 10 push-ups every single morning before I start the day.
Mm.
Now, and that's just personally, right? So I'm really trying to set up a framework, and I really have Techstars to thank for that. We just got out of the Techstars program, and I got surrounded by some of the best minds in industry. And one of the entrepreneurs gave a session on time management, which really indoctrinated to me how to spend time, like how to effectively plan your week and chunk up your time so that you're not distracted. And so the small ball professionally for me right now is a combination of getting really good at time management in very small blocks, making lists of things that I do for the forthcoming week, and trying to be very specific about what I'm spending time on.
Mm.
In addition to that, don't have one single point of failure. I don't, as an entrepreneur, I need a little bit of diversification, because I have a very great friend and advisor, Dr. Shreyas Gandhi, who has beat into my head because we went through the Six Sigma program at Raytheon Company together. He was like, in engineering, never have a single point of failure. So small ball for me in the professional capacity is also to, work a couple of angles in tandem, but don't steal time, right? Manage time effectively so as not to steal time away from what's important and what the fastest path to cash is, of course.
Right. And there's so much in there. So many amazing elements of small ball. And I love the 10 push-ups a day just as a great example for anything, right? I mean, do a little bit. We all, not all, but so many of us, myself included, get into those habits of all or none. You can live in the middle. You can do a little bit, and a little bit's better than nothing at all. And so habit forming, and that's small ball's habit forming. It's those little elements that you do every single day. I love my business coach talks about the non-negotiables setting the standard.
Oh
So
yeah.
if those push-ups are non-negotiable, then that's going to become your standard, and fill in the blank for whatever that is. So let me get to my final four questions, my rounding the bases questions. And let's start with one that you just mentioned too, because you are in a world of needing to raise money. That is that world of that serial entrepreneur. Yet, um, it can be very tempting to cut those corners to get there quickly. You've been through all of that before. I'm not saying you've done that, but you've been through all of that before. And now this becomes an endeavor that is much more personal. How has that changed your fundraising, your approach on all of this, if at all, the personal aspect of it?
Well, that's a great question, and there's a lot to that question. Um, there's a large spectrum in business, right, between the self-funded, bootstrapped ventures that don't require venture capital investment, which was my last business, which I've spent the last 8 years, yeah, I spent eight years of my life building a business and having it self-funded and bootstrapped. And then I enter and land into the venture world, which is, as of last year, very foreign to me. And what has carried through and carried over is required integrity and fiduciary responsibility, right? So I'm a Mensch, and I have a fiduciary responsibility to my investors and to my employees and to my business partners, and that is the most important thing that I have to say to the venture community, is that I'm not, and to some extent, in my opinion, that is somewhat of a unique approach in terms of how to talk with and get money from investors. I'm learning the dynamics and the composition of venture-backed industries, and it's I certainly don't want to sell snake oil, and for me it's a balancing act between selling what's possible and selling what's practical, because I want to be very practical with everybody that I ask for money from, because I want to be able to return value for that investment. I won't take money for the sake of taking money. I'm very discretionary about who I partner with. We have some amazing financial partners and investors right now. And yes, we're gearing up for another round of financing. But I'm at the point in the business right now where we have to establish some more proof points and some more meaningful traction in order for me to have the utmost confidence that I'm going to be able to return value on an investor's money. That being said, there are a number of factors, right? And largely timing is one of the biggest factors that could potentially cause the business to fail. I mean, every entrepreneur says failure is not an option. And I certainly live that way. However, timing is a factor, and product market fit is a factor, finding the right customer. I mean, there are a number of factors in what is an extraordinarily difficult industry of healthcare that have a bearing on our trajectory as a company. Now, that being said, I get back to the inflection point and the realities of our society, largely brought upon by COVID-19. And I'm saying to myself, the timing is right. The timing is now. We have to make investments in human to computer interfaces to support people's emotional well-being. So it's a really exciting time in the same vein. And I'm very bullish on the industry in whole, and I'm very bullish on our business as well going into 2022.
Great insight there. And I should say, awesome use of the word Mensch. If you're a Mensch, you're someone that I will be a fan of forever. For those that don't know the word, I mean, I grew up with words like that. When your last name is Goldberg, Mensch in Yiddish basically means you're a high character person. It's that guy that's going to take care of people, open the door, treat people well, respect. That always knows the way of doing the right thing. So that word spoke to me. But when I was looking through your bio and we did our research, this was a word I did not know. I had to look it up, embarrassingly, or maybe not, but it's the first on the show. You have a Bachelor of Arts in Epistemology.
Yeah. Yeah.
which I looked it up. I'll let you explain it, but it actually kind of speaks to so much of what you've been talking about today.
Yeah, epistemology is the study of the nature of knowledge, right? So it's effectively a historical research on the history of ideas. And people might not think like, I mean, everything is studied in this world, everything is researched, and epistemology is essentially the study of that of ideas.
Okay, so now I know. I didn't know before, but now I have a greater under. I saw that and I'm like, all right, let's go right to Google and figure that one out. And so it all makes sense. My third question, as we round the bases, and I like to ask this one to a lot of entrepreneurs because there are a lot of younger versions of all of us that are coming onto the scene, and especially nowadays too, where there's so much independence and so much people wanting, Gen Z, they want to go out there and they want to find what works for them, and I think it's the rest of us actually that need to adjust to that. But there's a lot of excitement with that, and with that there'll be a lot of people that want to explore, want to be curious, and of course that's part of being an entrepreneur. What advice do you have for someone young that's getting into this, and there potentially can be the allure of money that we've talked about. There can be that intersection of purpose and funding and money. What advice do you have for someone young trying to dip their feet into this, their toes into this?
Yeah, really, it's I know Facebook and Meta have gotten a lot of flack in the last few weeks about some of their operating practices, and there are a number of Facebook was one of our customers in my last business, and despite what's going on in that industry and with them specifically, the idea of failing fast is something that I've carried through my entire career. Because in organizations, especially, and so fail fast, right? So that is one adage that I think is very important for young entrepreneurs to embrace. I would also say, like, in my career, I started. I've written an outline of a book called Cubicle Crashers, and it was my life experience as an intrapreneur, which is somebody who's sitting in a large organization who is creating businesses from within that company. And I invite all of those Gen Zers out there right now that are sitting in chairs in large organizations to go and look for those problems that they can solve from within those four walls. It's one of the safest ways to start an entrepreneurial journey, being an intrapreneur. I was very successful at it, and I learned a ton that translated immediately into my first entrepreneurial journey.
Well, there's so much to learn out there. I still say so much comes back to curiosity, and when we're curious, you learn more. You end up going down paths maybe you didn't expect. I think that's probably what's happening to you right now in such a meaningful way. I want to remind everybody, and it'll be in the show notes as well, that if you want to learn more about Eliot, his company, getmoodspark.com. Getmoodspark.com. This is something that we all can relate to. For some of us, even more so than others, but we all, I believe, can have the understanding to some degree, and the empathy of our seniors and that generation, especially at a time like right now, as we're still dealing with this pandemic. Hopefully less, but we never know the way the world is changing. A quick shout out to Erin Folk, who made the connection. She's always so great with that, and perhaps our paths would have crossed at some point. I suspect maybe they would have eventually, but I don't know. And because of Erin, I want to thank her for that. She knows, feels like everybody, and is always trying to promote so many good causes and so much of the good that is going on in this crazy world that we live in. So, Ellie, congratulations on everything you're doing, especially on such a personal endeavor here and your next journey. as a serial entrepreneur. Best of luck, and I appreciate you spending the time.
Thanks, Joel. I really appreciate your time as well, and love the show. Appreciate it.